This is the first in-person visiting artist lecture since, I think, last March or February, I'm not sure. But either way, I'm really excited. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the land of the Kalapuya, who today are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, whose relationship with this land continues today. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community on this land. We acknowledge that our university's history, like many others, is fundamentally tied to the first colonial developments in the Willamette Valley. Finally, we respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Indigenous students at the University of Oregon. Today, on behalf of the University of Oregon School of Art and Design and the Center for Art Research, I have the pleasure of introducing artist Catherine Haggerty. Catherine is based in Brooklyn, New York, where she is an adjunct professor at the School of Visual Arts and also the co-founder and co-director of NYC Crit Club. Catherine's paintings and curatorial work have been featured in Bomb Magazine, Hyperallergic, ArtNet, Two Coats of Paint, Brooklyn Magazine, and the New York Times, among others. Solo exhibitions include Massey Klein Gallery, this Friday, next Friday, and Look and Listen in Marseille, France. Catherine's vibrant and layered paintings contain distinct visual lexicons that are both elemental and complex. My personal interest in Catherine's work stems from the particular ways her paintings evoke past and present, human and non-human, analog and digital. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Haggerty.
All right, can you all hear me okay? In the back? Promise? All right, wave if you can. So, hello everyone, I'm so excited to be here today. I have an ambitious amount of things I want to talk about, and so I will do my best to be as clear and concise, but also improvise when needed. But first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me out here and for getting me out here. It's a long day of travel yesterday, but worth it. Anyone who knows me personally knows I hate flying with a passion, and so the best thing about flying, though, is that I can't use the internet, and I'm forced to draw, usually, because that's the one thing that definitely keeps me calm. So I made some really good drawings on the airplane coming here from New York yesterday, so thank you for that. That gave me a lot of undivided attention, which frankly is really needed. So, but I'm so excited to be here today to talk to all of you in person after a life feels like a lifetime on Zoom. So I'm really excited, and tomorrow, of course, to see studios and talk about art. The title of the talk, which I devised a few months ago, is "You Know More Than You Can Say." I'll echo this idea throughout the talk in different capacities. Some things I want to talk about today in different ways are relationships I have to drawing and painting, art history, a sense of collaboration and research in the art world at large, both from an academic perspective, an institutional perspective, and a non-institutional perspective. Curating as a task to influence culture, to shape culture, curating as sort of an outreach. And also, of course, this leads to a larger and more important topic, which is sustainability in the art world and inclusion in the art world. Both are huge issues. I know a lot of people in the audience are perhaps younger in the journey of art, or whatever you want to refer to it as. And I think it's really important to echo ideas of sustainability and also of inclusion post-academic environment. So I'll share with you what I can. I grew up a very serious athlete, and this has sort of affected my mentality in a lot of ways. The origin points of my childhood despite my thinking that they would fade away, have remained pretty true in my life. Although when you look at my work, perhaps you would not think that, but it has shaped a sort of developmental aspect of how I approach projects and teaching, and also sort of larger issues of endurance within the art world I'm in. This is a drawing on the left I made in 2015, and a medal I keep in my studio. I think I earned that when I was younger. It could have been one of my siblings, but I keep it in the studio as a sort of sentimental but also sort of specific personal archive of a previous life. Throughout the talk, I'm going to show you a lot of work. Some of the work will be my own, some of it will be from art history, some of it will be from my students. I want, as much as I can, to make artist talks and lectures, or whatever you want to call them, as inclusive as possible about influence and, of course, about how I generate ideas and paintings. On the right is an ancient amphora that I love, that I found, and I collect images on my phone and my computer and my desktop sort of obsessively. On the left is a painting I made in 2016 or 17. And I'll talk a little bit about the formal aspects of the paintings and the drawings, but I wanted to start off here with this sort of collision of a reference of an amphora, a reference of a vase, a reference of a shoe, objects which we can name and we can delineate meaning, but sort of this collision of influence, and also a painting that I can't put into words why I made it or exactly how I made it. So over the next few slides, we'll get down to how I generate ideas and how ideas come about in my research. Some things I want to talk about throughout the conversation, or the slides today, and I also didn't say this, and I know every lecture starts off this way, where people say, if you have questions, please ask. I really mean that. If you have questions during, it's fine to raise your hand and ask. I'd love that. But I want to talk about this idea of success, of endurance and proximity in relation to the art world throughout the talk. And so if you have questions, or you're like, I'm not sure, that's totally fine. I'm using this analogy right here on the screen of a track race. This is, I think, this is the Rio Olympics in 2016. I'm a huge track fan. I've run a few marathons, and although I played basketball in college, I have a continued love with running, so it's kind of nice to be here in Eugene for that reason. The idea of success in art is really, really complicated, and something I don't have any answers to. I know it's a personal thing. I know success is defined differently by everyone. It's something I'm interested in, though, because I think it has to be addressed in some way. The ideas of sustainability and of community are the goal. Fundamentally in athletics, you cross the line first, you win. You score more points, you win. There's a really, really pretty clear line in the sand about success in athletics. There's no winning in art. That's what I think, personally. Other people might disagree. I take a more poetic approach to it all, but truly there's no winning in art. I use this analogy, or this sort of reference of sports, as a departure point. This sometimes arrives in my paintings as a subject, as something you can recognize, but it's also a mentality. I'm going to close the talk today with a few projects I'm deeply invested in the art world, to create community and also to create inclusion. And I will echo this idea of collaboration throughout the talk. So here we are. I wanted to just give a shout out to Donna Nelson. I went to a talk with her in 2018 at the New York Studio School, and I loved her artist talk. I thought, one day if I'm ever brave enough, I'll be as good as her. But Donna Nelson sat on stage at the New York Studio School with a glass of wine in her hand and sort of bellowed to the audience about her opinions. And if you know Donna Nelson personally, or just through the art world, just hearing, she's wonderful and incredibly smart and bold. And one thing that Donna talked about in this artist talk, which I'm sharing, so this is Donna's sort of tidbit of wisdom, was to collect art, to buy art, to trade art, and to do whatever you can to support any art at any level and any range you can. So I'm just sharing that again because I found it really moving. When I had seen this lecture years ago, I had an interest, of course, in trading art. I don't have a lot of money, so buying art's not really something I can do, but occasionally I'll finance a piece, like very, very small increments of money here. But I'm echoing this because it impacted my life, and I went off on a journey after that talk to make sure that I traded with people I looked up to, but also traded with people that I was in an academic environment with, students and people I was mentoring, and students as young as 7th grade. So this is an artist who was in 7th grade who made a beautiful painting, and I was working at a school at the time and saw it in the hallway. I found her parents' contact information, emailed them, and told them I really wanted to buy the art, and they thought it was a scam or a joke. And I continued to tell them I'm a real person and I really want to give money for this art. Anyway, I had this wonderful studio visit with this 7th grade girl, and I gave her $200. It's a beautiful painting, and she said she was going to use it for her art studio, and I thought, well, that's fabulous. I don't know if you're going to be an artist, but I thought that is such a wonderful way to sort of, I don't know, give credit where credit's due. It's something that I never got when I was younger. I certainly never thought you could do art. I had no idea how to do it as a life, and sometimes I still don't, but here we are. So buy, trade, art, support all people in art. All of the things that Donna echoed in that talk really ring true with me today. I'm going to start with some formative experiences in art that, I already have, but I'm going to continue here. In 2010-11, I was in graduate school at Rutgers, MFA. One of my mentors was Tom Niskowski, the late Tom Niskowski. Tom was a wonderful painter, thinker, a really kind person. Tom gave me a lot of advice in the studio. He would walk into the studio and pick out something in a painting that was small and flawed and completely unfinished, and he would tell me that's the best part, of course, which was infuriating at the time, but I understand now, of course, why he did that. He was looking for these sort of breaks in systems and these breaks in patterns. The parts of paintings where painting's logic shuts down and painting opens up. And so Tom's really a champion at that, and of course, as a mentor to me, he helped me see that. And I can't escape this sort of interest that he instilled in me and this sort of idea of systems breaking down and systems building up in painting. The most important thing Tom echoed, though, to me and other people that we got to work with was that you are going to be okay if you can be alone in the studio. And I thought at the time in graduate school 12 years ago, well, of course I'm going to be okay in the studio. Like, what did he mean? That was the whole goal, was just to be an artist in the studio. And although I knew what he meant at the time, over the last decade I felt it more tried and true. The pace of life gets busy, money becomes an issue, family, stress, work, and there's a lot pulling at artists to not be in the studio or the place in which they work. Not everyone needs a studio, of course, to make art. So I just wanted to share that. Tom's influence to me was important in terms of painting, but also within this idea of how to be alone with yourself in the studio and how to have that mentality, even if you have shows or any sort of success or not. So another formative experience I had was in 2012. I had just graduated Rutgers MFA. I happened about an opportunity to teach and mentor a young artist who has autism, and his name is Tyler. His family asked that I come in and help him improve his painting. The idea that I could improve the work using varying degrees of applied behavior analysis, ABA, which is something I was fairly familiar with being a psychology major in college, not an art major. I had a fair idea, certainly not a professional idea, but my role was just to be a mentor and a friend and to maybe shape and improve Tyler's paintings. Why am I telling you this? This was a really formative experience. I had just left graduate school, tons of heady readings and opinions and judgment, and I was feeling like I wasn't totally sure how to deal with the art world post-school. And then I'm in the situation where I'm mentoring and teaching a young artist who has autism and a deep love for painting. The prompts and the goals that they wanted me to give him were, could he learn how to paint himself alone? Like, could he clean his brushes alone? Or how could he organize his palette? These are just behavioral things that actually every person, no matter their situation, has to deal with. And so they wanted me to try to teach him something. I think we did teach each other quite a bit. I'm positive he taught me more than I taught him. One of the things that was clear to me was that no matter the setup I gave Tyler and his work, he had a stronger vision than anything I could give any sort of reinforcement or plan to circumnavigate. Tyler's vision is something I can't teach and something I wasn't interested in teaching, and eventually the relationship became just a pure friendship. And I think his parents started to realize that that was the best possible thing. This really shaped my idea of painting and my idea of teaching and my idea of learning from a really, really younger age, and also at a really important time where I felt like grad school was done. Should I be selling paint? Like, how do you do this thing after school? No one told me anything about the practical stuff, which I think is not right, but I'll tell you anything I can tell you now if it helps. But Tyler's vision is stronger than anything I could have taught him. If you see here on the left, there's a still life setup that I prompted. We found objects together, and I helped him with the palette, and I said nothing else. And this is what he produced, which I think is really incredible. So the way that we see is different. The way we execute for everyone is really different. And this is some pretty pure abstraction, although he might not describe it that way. So when I go back to thinking about this idea of you know more than you can say, this is a principle I think about when I teach artists how to write about their work, how to speak about their work. Ultimately, all language, despite its specific and research and sort of attempts to be articulate, fails. Images are completely different. They are not going to collide perfectly with the description. And when I think about how Tyler painted and how Tyler then would describe his work, there was this sort of knowing more than he could say. And I found that really beautiful, and I still do. One of the most important things in my art life is drawing. Contour and blind contour drawing plays a huge role in my work. This idea of contour drawing, continuous line drawing, is steeped in the idea of attention, which is to say attention to detail, to form, to looking, to trusting one's hand and one's eye. I echo this in any class I teach, advanced or beginning, as a really important element, not just to be used as a warm-up or preparation, but as the work itself. Drawing is the work itself. Although people would argue it's preparation or it's a sort of tool to get to another thing, I think drawing's autonomy is, and its sort of primacy is really important in my work and research. Sometimes the contour practice that I do is done while waiting for students to finish a project, or from memory, or on the train. Contour drawing from memory rejects the fundamental principle that contour drawing is about observing something in real life with your eyes and your best attention. So I refer to this maybe perhaps better as continuous line drawing or automatic drawing. This process sort of surprises me and forces me to pay attention to my hand as opposed to ideas. Ideas come in and out very fast, but what my hand wants to do and what my brain can let it do are two different things. And so drawing is a way to sort of relocate my understanding and my interests, among many things. Drawing's agency is its primacy. I think on some level, drawing is paramount, or at least existent in everyone's life. Another formative experience I had is, on this slide you can see an image on the right. A young student I taught from 2013 to 14. There was a situation essentially in which I was teaching all ages at once. Another thing, after graduate school, I don't know, I thought I would just go teach in college and it would be fine. I'd show at a gallery and everything would just work out. And I actually had a lot of different jobs after grad school that I'm really thankful I did. I know that people judged me for teaching middle school art for a long time. Not necessarily everyone, but I think people thought, well, that's not like serious, or I don't know, that doesn't seem like worth your time. And I remember hearing that and thinking, well, it's a steady job. It gave me a paycheck, it allowed me to have a studio. But what it really also gave me is this engagement with learning, drawing, and painting at a really early age, which affected my ability to make paintings myself and to question the sort of early formative experiences of drawing. It's very simple. Tracing is really easy for some people, and tracing is really not easy for other people. This being greeted with this reality so abruptly was heartbreaking for me, and I think it continued my love for drawing and my love for line and my love for attention, and also truly kept me humble in a sort of way where I realized that this drawing on the right was as beautiful as one that I could have made with 3 more hours of effort. So this was a really formative experience to me in general, and still is. So at the time, I'm thinking, well, how do I champion this experience I'm having? I'm teaching at a middle school. I'm teaching all cognitive levels. I'm juggling a lot. I'm making my paintings. I'm going in and out of shows in New York, and I'm trying to figure out how to champion that experience of watching people draw at different levels. So what I did was I just tried to embrace and reflect on this process of drawing in my work. And I kind of hesitate to even call myself a painter or categorize myself in any way. I have a stronger relationship to drawing. Sometimes I'll scratch into a wet gessoed surface to conjure a form and a memory, or to advocate for line or continuous line. I'm really interested in how conflating soft paint and decisive lines can challenge my sensibility of what looks real and what looks grounded. Here I'm using a reoccurring trope in my work, or form in my work, which is a vase, to use as sort of a device to play with form, composition, maybe a stand-in for a figure, a trophy, the sort of idea of honoring and of containing. So this is an early painting from 2014 or 15. While working at this school, I also absorbed a ton of culture and youth that I otherwise would never have seen. And that I had long forgotten about. I noticed the things that were really important to kids: birthdays, shorts, cakes, basketball, the good stuff, the stuff that everyone has a fun time with in some way when they're little, and I had forgotten about for quite a while. This made me reflect on my own experiences, but then also memories of my own childhood, very specifically about sports and the sort of idea of large family dinners. This is a painting from that time. You can see there's a heavy reliance on line, sort of a graphic quality. There's no personal space that stands out. The space is illogical. This is a reoccurring thing in my work. I used to see this as an issue, but I now understand a little bit better about my relationship to space, which I'll elaborate more on. At the time, I was also running marathons, like 1 a year, and I was training before I went to work, and then I'd go teach, and then I'd go to my studio. I was very busy, but very tired, and I was starting to think about grad school prompts I had gotten. I'm interested in psychology, I'm interested in feelings and behaviors, but one of the things that's hard is, like, how do you paint about that? How can you possibly make a painting about feeling uncomfortable? How can you show it? How can the paint mirror this? How can the composition mirror this? At the time, I'm running marathons, and I'm starting to not fit into my sports bras the way I used to fit into my sports bras. And I think, well, there's no better subject than to think about how awkward that feels. So this is a painting that I wanted to try to deal with an abstract idea: exhaustion, strength, discomfort, pride. Jeans that fit too tight. This feeling of, well, how do I possibly paint about that? Can I compose 2 legs that edge each other? Can I sort of sand down the surface to deal with a sort of early painting and continually layer this sort of fight with form, which is something I've been dealing with for a long time. I think that there's a level of abstraction in all of this work, which is to say a sort of reducing of the description and a nuance that I'm interested in, which is an openness. So this is a painting from 2015. At the time, also, since I'm around school kids and I'm thinking about this idea of childhood and youth, I start to think about ways I can contain my ideas. I'm noticing I have a lot of ideas at the time, and I'm not sure how to make a frame, like a sort of a framework or an ecosystem. So I give myself the prompt of picking one subject and making work about it for a year. And I said, I think the subject is going to be a backpack, because a backpack is the sort of structure that contains objects, but also, of course, reflects identity, reflects culture, childhood. It's a surface to make paintings on about everything. And so what I'm craving at the time, and what I still always crave, is this ability to make paintings about anything. And it seems paralyzing, because then art school and all of these things that make you explain yourself, it's hard to explain what you want to make art about. So I thought I'll give myself a container, and the container is a backpack. So I'm thinking about these ideas of, identity or patterns or childhood, and I'm trying to focus on the backpack as a way to enter painting. At the time, I'm also single. I'm going on dates, bad dates, good dates, you name it. I'm trying to think about ways my personal life can come into the paintings a little bit more specifically. Although I'm definitely an outgoing person, I still struggle with that sort of importance of my life personally to be in paintings, as I really think there are more interesting things than myself. But here I'm trying to deal with the idea of intimacy, of kissing, of the sort of moments of quietude, and I'm strictly keeping to the surface of a backpack. Sometimes the backpack is an underwater backpack, an out of space backpack. Sometimes the backpack is not clear and it begins to dissolve. So this is what I'm doing. I'm trying really, really hard to make work about my life, but also within a sort of system so I have more freedom. In a strange way, I say this a lot in crits and conversations, commitment sets you free. When you commit to a framework or a sort of, I don't want to say idea, but a structure, you then have so much freedom within that ecosystem or that framework. And so although art can be sort of paralyzing because you're allowed to do anything you want after school, you have to have a sort of system that lets you research and lets you contain ideas. Well, you don't have to do anything, but it does work for me. So I will just say that a framework or an ecosystem is healthy until it's not healthy, and then you should ditch it. At the time, I'm also living illegally in a warehouse, even though I had a full-time job with healthcare, which was like the point of everything. It's always the point. I mean, when are we going to get universal healthcare? I just don't know. But I was overworked, working full-time at a school for healthcare, living right outside of New York City, I won't say where, illegally in a warehouse, and eating hard-boiled eggs from the bodega. And although I had a job, I just wanted to save because I wanted to go to France that spring for a residency. This is actually a really nice looking corner of my studio. I will say the other corners did not look so nice. There was holes in the windows, there was no heat, and I had to sneak my groceries in so all the bougie people that lived in the neighborhood didn't call the cops on me. But it was also really fun and made me feel really alive and free. I'm not telling you to do this, but I'm just sharing one experience. I'm really happy to not live in my studio anymore, but I share this just because it's a small section of reality. One thing about artist talks when I was in grad school, I always loved them, but I always loved when any artist gave me just a sliver of what life was after, just something, give me some idea, because I had no idea, and although I want to hear about everyone's successes, I was really dying to hear some logistics. So I did this to save money. And I did this to save money so I could go to France that spring for just 10 days. It's 10 days. I worked really hard for a year to be able to fly myself out there and do this project. So this is me in France in 2016. And I had gone out there on a residency, air quotes. So I've done formal residencies. I think they're great. They're a great way for artists to have time. I kind of refer to grad school as a little bit of a residency because you have this focused attention and this amazing community, but it's of course very different. This is a residency that was sort of self-built with another artist in France that I became friends with online, Yifat Gat, who's a wonderful artist, and invited me to her home in the south of France. And it was my first time going to France and having this autonomy alone in the middle of a busy year. And I am here painting in the studio with some random village cat. And I think that at this time, although I didn't want to admit it, I was at a real tipping point. I felt like I had extracted all the goodness from teaching kids and being positive and working so hard and bartending on Wednesdays so I could afford my studio. I mean, it just was a lot. And I had hit a wall, and my work also hit a wall. And at this time, Trump was about to be elected, and I was living in this warehouse. Life just felt like a little bit too much. And so I went to France, and when I got back, I found out that my job was cut by the budget. And I was sad for 10 minutes, and then I was thrilled. So I was freed of this sort of strict schedule and free to do what I wanted. And so that was sort of a tipping point for me, and it sort of shifted a body of work, this trip. After this trip, I went back to my studio, And I had gotten a new studio in Brooklyn, and I started to sort of make work from a different vantage point. I was asked earlier by Erin, which is a really great question about my use of color, really fabulous question that I hadn't thought about in a long time. The colors seem to be like electric, or perhaps like what Erin referred to as a Las Vegas like strip, sort of something like digital, or something about a sign or an electric sign. And to be very honest, my choice in color at this time was a real strategy for hope. During Trump's election, in between jobs, bartending, just a whole lot of things, I started to feel like color was this one thing I could go to for this like level of joy. This sort of like, I didn't have to explain it, but I was craving bright colors, and I wasn't interested in them being local or them being representative of how the object was. I was interested in color as a way to survive. As you can see at this time, the paintings are devoid of backpacks, they're devoid of people. They are structures that have amphora, benches, letters, leaves, like really just inanimate objects, nothing personal. And I think I didn't know this at the time, but I just couldn't deal with representing a human. I couldn't do it anymore. So this body of work that I started in 2017 or so lasted for about 2 years. At this time, I'm also beginning to be a curator at Ortega y Gasset Projects in Gowanus, Brooklyn, which was a really important project that afforded me a ton of show opportunities with friends, but a group of friends that I learned a lot about art from. I'm taking these objects in my new framework after 2017. I'm taking a bench, an arch, a vase, an amphora, and I'm trying to think about this absence of a living form. I'm developing new techniques or testing new techniques in airbrush guns and spray paint and plaster and sculptamold. And I'm just trying to make sense of these forms that I've decided for whatever reason at the time were important to me. And so in a lot of ways, these paintings became not about formalism, but about this sort of sense of how to sort of arrange things that don't belong, and how to deal with color in a new and sort of innovating way for myself, and how to deal and challenge structure of the canvas. I was interested in how I could paint about land as a place, but also land as form. At this time, I'm also researching and finding new art videos to watch, and this is one I recommend. It's David Hockney, Painting and Photography at the Getty. It's a long artist talk, but he talks about a lot of his research in the role of technology in painting. This began to be a really important diversion in my studio and my teaching. And so I recommend this video, but this is a screenshot from the video, so it's not certainly the best. But among the immense amount of things I find interesting about this talk by David Hockney and his many theories, one in particular deals with space in the picture plane. So if you've noticed, none of the paintings I've shown you have any background. Like, I don't address the background. I don't put things in a physical space that is logical. I don't always know why. I'm starting to figure this out slowly but surely. David Hockney talks about the scientific perspective in the West, linear perspective. It provides a sort of fixed space, one that can be contained and controlled by the human. This benefits so many aspects of culture, linear perspective does, that is to say. It helps urban planning in the 15th century. It helps design. It, of course, helps paintings and architecture. It also helps warfare and precision. It's one perspective, but certainly not the only perspective. The Chinese in the Tang period suggested space that implied a sort of continuous space beyond the picture plane. So here we see paintings that are sort of, this is a screenshot, of course, of a larger scroll painting, but this sort of tradition of the form going off the picture plane is a reference to the sort of eternity of the story and eternity of land. This idea for me of an unlimited space of nature is exciting and was exciting for me at the time. So while I'm making these paintings, I'm starting to think about how I can deal with space in a different way. And this video really helped me in many ways. This is just another beautiful painting. This is a painting that roughly about, I'm not exactly sure when this was made. I think it's like maybe early 1600s. This shows a sort of perspective, axonometric perspective, that shows multiple vantage points and all humans at the same scale, no matter where they are in the picture plane. And this existed 2,000 years ago and was invented by the Chinese. The size and the geometry of all the man-made objects remains consistent, regardless of the perspective. So I'm just learning, at this time about these different ways that perspective has been used in terms of space. I'm beginning to think about how I can deal with these forms in a space that either indicates land or indicates a divided schematic space. So it translates to my work in very, very different ways and sometimes very subtle. But this is something I'm continually interested in. These are paintings from 2018 or 19. They're oil paint, airbrush, acrylic, plaster. Research for me varies. It could be a video I find on an art history movement. It could be a podcast. This painting, particularly on the left, had many versions of itself, but was inspired by a podcast on Radiolab about colors. Maybe you've heard it or seen it. This podcast talked about mantis shrimp and their ability to see more colors in the spectrum than we could. I can't remember exactly, but they can see double or triple the amount of colors we could. So while I'm working in the studio thinking about my archetypes and how I can challenge these paintings formally, I'm then sort of blown away by this idea of more colors than I can imagine. So this sort of happenstance situation of research is a real thing in the work and also provides a place for me to play and a place for me to invent. So here I'm dealing with the same forms, but I'm thinking about colors I can't see, or is it possible for me to create new colors out of a typical gradient? Of course, I know it's not possible, but these are sort of painting prompts. In this work and all work, drawing continues to play a continued role. I'm dealing again with these sort of forms and beginning to, at this point, start to begin tired of these forms. Although I really love these paintings and this body of work, I started to crave something different. Drawing plays a role both in preparation but in activation. So here, if you can see closely, the canvas is gessoed like 20 times, lots of layers and mistakes, lots of history, but drawing is the first act I do on a canvas, whether or not it's my hand or a brush or a pencil into wet gesso or with an airbrush gun directly. So there's this sort of initial act of line that sort of lives underneath the final version of any painting. I was thinking towards the end of this work about protecting these paintings, giving them roofs, giving them like a home or some sort of a physical shelter. This arch that was painted also is mirrored in the sort of plaster in the sculptamold at the top of each painting. So I'm using airbrush, I'm using plaster. I'm trying to think about how I can recompose these images that I've been painting for 2 years in dynamic and quiet and interesting ways. As you can see too, some of these paintings are dealing with a sort of framing device, a portrait, a landscape and a portrait, and yeah. At this time, I'm a member of Ortega y Gasset Projects. This is an artist-run gallery in Gowanus, Brooklyn. This was my first show that I curated with a project that I was a member for 3 years. It's a 2-person show with Matt Phillips and Travis Fairclough. I was invited to be a curatorial member, which just means that once every year and a half, I got the opportunity to give someone else a show. And although I myself certainly I wanted to be in shows, I was in some, but nothing big. I was like, well, that would be great. I could give other people opportunities. And so artist-run projects have existed for quite a while, but the level of which I think they play a role in the artist's life is really important. And I think can't be sort of underestimated in terms of its ability to launch careers or sort of give people a push. What artist-run galleries do fundamentally, though, is that they escape the sort of market system that galleries have to function with, which is to say sales. So typically artist-run galleries, they pay the rent themselves and they don't have to sell work to survive. So then they have more autonomy in who they can curate. They can take more risks. This isn't always the case, but this is often the case. So I just want to show this example. This is part of the sort of sustainability, the sort of outreach of being an artist, that it is not just about you and your studio, that you matter, but the people around you matter a great deal, and that you can definitely learn from them. And working with a group of 7 to 10 artists also challenges your sensibilities. So for example, maybe someone else wants to curate a show and me and the group might not know what to think of it or what to do, but if they, believe in it, we have to support them. And so this idea of continually learning and challenging your sensibilities about what's valuable maintains true in all professional aspects of art. This is a solo show of Rose Nestler in 2018 that I co-curated with my friend Zahar Vax, who's a wonderful painter and friend. And Rose is now a really dear friend of mine, and this was her first solo show in New York, and she is on her way. She just had a major solo show in London at Public Gallery, and she's phenomenal. This is the last show I curated with the project, and it's a two-person show of David Humphrey and Keisha Priel Martin. David Humphrey is a Guggenheim Fellow, a Rome Prize recipient, very, very successful, very, very generous, very, very interested in being connected to different generations and different people. And David was really up for this project. And Keisha, who I had met in Crit Club about that year, had just finished her BFA at SUNY Purchase. So I thought, I believe in Keisha's work. I want Keisha to have an opportunity, something that would really maybe spark her, career or whatever you want to refer to it as, but also, correlate her and an older artist in a sort of relationship that otherwise might not have existed. At the time, David was having a major solo show at his gallery in Chelsea, and so this show collided at the same month, so it was a really exciting time. I titled the show Footloose. There was a synergy with both of his work and her work about dancing, about exuberance, and although David's application and paint logic is different, and so is Keisha's, I felt like there was some real beautiful synergy there. So this was the last project I curated with the group, and I sort of stepped down after 2019. At this time, I'm starting the New York City Crit Club, which I will talk about at the end of the lecture, and I just could not do both. And so I felt like I had to choose. And this happens a lot. Every 3 to 4 years, I realize I have to downsize. Something has to go, or else my work will suffer, and the work is always the goal. So you have to be pretty honest with yourself. Anyway, so it's 2018 and 19 at this time. I'm busy in the studio. I'm showing, I'm doing some things, but I'm starting to feel really, really exhausted. I moved my studio up to Bushwick, far from this current studio, which is in South Brooklyn. And I start teaching at the School of Visual Arts. I'm asked to create a course in the art history department of my choice. I moved studios. I left a gallery that I really loved working with, a program, and I made some big changes in my work. So the next few slides are going to be not about my work, but about a certain kind of research that inevitably affects my work. As it goes, everything affects your work if you're alive. So this sort of idea of continually finding a new strategy for me to work. It's 2019. I think I had just started working at, maybe the year before I started working at the School of Visual Arts, and I was asked to teach a course in the art history department, and the only requirement was that it does not focus on European art. I had already taught that, and they were like, we want a non-European art history course, so you have to design it, and you can do with that what you wish. So I'm at Frieze Art Fair, which is quite an experience in 2019, and I stumble upon this exhibition at Donald Ellis Gallery of ledger drawings. And at the time, I had no idea what ledger drawings really were, or, I mean, I had heard of them, but I felt like I should buy this book and learn something new. Plus, they're beautiful drawings, right? So I begin this sort of exploration of a new sort of understanding of drawing and its relationship to storytelling and, of course, to culture and heritage. This book, Keeping Time, Plains Indian Drawings from, I think it's like 1850 to 1901, shows a myriad of different tribes and collections of drawings made both in captivity and also on reservations. It's really heartbreaking, the conditions in which a lot of these drawings were made. Fundamentally, drawings were made on hide. Tatanka, which is buffalo, was the surface in which ledger paintings existed for quite a long time, and when settlers took and captured land and their sacred buffalo, they, Native Americans did not have the access, of course, to buffalo hide as a resource, and they were given ledger paper by settlers. Ledger paper is banking paper, it's like a receipt. And so they were given ledger paper in captivity and also on reservations to draw and to sort of keep the time, right? That's where the title, Keeping Time, comes from. There's a rhythm and cadence in this work that I feel is so important to show, and so I build the course around 3 weeks of this topic. I'm not a historian in this exact topic. I can't pretend to know everything about it, but I've done enough research and I feel really passionate about this work, so I make it a part of my art history course and frankly a lot of other courses because it should be taught. I never was taught any of this stuff in college or grad school, so I think it's, there needs to be a shift in what we pay attention to. So this is my favorite drawing, one of my favorite drawings. What this shows here, I have a few bullet points up here just to sort of give you an idea of what I'm referring to. This drawing shows a level of what they refer to in the book, the historians, as spatialized intelligence, which is simply to say a sort of intelligence in understanding space, not in the sort of classical or Western perspective. You can see no horizon line, there's no shadows, there are multiple views going on at once. There is sort of an X-ray vision. If I had a pointer, I'd point to the center of the picture where you can see objects and people all circled around each other. And that's actually a tent. So this is sort of a tent that the event is going on. And so they're showing the inside of the activity and the outside of the activity. And they're also showing 3 different events: the arrivals of the horse in the top right, and of course the entries or the parking of the horse on the bottom left. So when we think about the idea of intelligence with drawing or intelligence with painting and all of these sort of terms people throw around, it's important to understand that all cultures have a specific intelligence in drawing and painting. And although it might look different than the amount of paintings and drawings we see anchored in the West and sort of European culture, which is fabulous and very important to learn about, it's also really important to understand and respect this sort of work. So this is a huge source of inspiration for me. I hope I didn't spell anything wrong. So what's also heartbreaking about this is the conditions in which a lot of this art was made. So when I think about drawing's primacy, right, like going back to the beginning of this talk, I show you drawings that children made of all different levels and all different situations. The conditions of which art has to be made or wants to be made or desires to be made matter. And this sort of champions the primacy of drawing and painting, be it a cave painting or a painting made in prison or in some kind of school setting. This idea to communicate is paramount. Dozens of indigenous peoples were kept here in Fort Marion prison in the late 19th century, I think specifically 1976 for a few years. General Pratt over there on the left was the sort of guardian of the group, and a lot of these indigenous people came in not as artists and left as artists. Of course, we learned years later that lots of travelers came from the north on vacation and collected their art for investments and the sort of otherness that it provided, the sort of excitement of people that didn't look like them. So you can see the sort of unfortunate, but also the sort of bravery of the work that was made in the conditions. I think it's important to just share this. It's sort of mind-blowing, but this sort of experience is important in understanding why these drawings had to be made and how they were made. So I love these drawings for that reason, but I also love the drawings from a formal perspective, repetition, the sort of cadence to scale, the directness of line. I mean, if you look at the horse and so many elements of these drawings, the use of line is so beautiful. You can learn a lot about the culture and about the experience through these drawings. There's signifiers of gender, there's signifiers of non-gendered people, there's signifiers of hunting, of courtship, of dating, so they're highly informative. And so I guess this is obvious, but it's something that really is important to me, is to restate how intelligent and how packed full of information drawing can afford us a look into another experience. Here is a courtship drawing. The person with the cloak carried with a cloak sort of wrapped around them. That would have been a sign that the courtship was agreed upon. There was always someone who was overlooking any courtships. There was sort of a monitor or like an elder, someone who was wise that would oversee all dating and courtships. And so whenever you see these drawings with someone with a blanket or a jacket wrapped around them, this is showing that the approval is there. Anyway, Another part of this course that I teach that I'm really interested in is the great epic of the Ramayana. The Sita and Rama Lakshmana. This is a beautiful painting that to me also shows so many things, but a use of space in a really particular way. In the top left, you can see the river is almost like tilted towards us as a viewer. In the bottom, it looks like we have an aerial perspective. So part of the course, we focus a few weeks on that, on the indigenous drawings before that I spoke about, and then a few weeks on Southeast Asia, and in particular Indian paintings and the great epic. I think that I have a sincere appreciation for how these are made, the detail, the perspective, the stories, and the sort of functionality of painting throughout history. Something that's consistent in all of these drawings and paintings is that perspective is in service to narrative. So I think the sort of acknowledgement of bias within viewing art is really important. I think perhaps 10 years ago I might have not understood why the picture plane is divided by a river, or there's 3 different multiple representations of the same person. But it's really important to remind ourselves of how painting and drawing functioned for thousands and thousands of years before different uses of perspective and/or technologies or new materials. There's multiple events at once, there's a bird's eye or aerial perspective, and there's quite a bit of signifiers and information in this great epic story. The last part of this class is the sort of focus on the Edo period, and I bring this up again only because all of this research has impacted my thinking in art, and also how I can possibly ever help in a critique or a discussion about what is working and what's not, or what to pursue and what to stop pursuing. This idea in the class is really focused on ukiyo-e prints, and also just learning about the sort of dynamic seclusionist policy that occurred for almost 250 years in Japan, which specifically did not want anything to do with the West, and wanted to preserve culture and sort of take care of their own culture in a different way, instead of the massive amounts of changes that would have happened if the seclusionist policy didn't happen. Along this sort of research, I'm learning about different sort of terms, this sort of idea that the roofs are being blown off, which is a sort of technique to show us an inside-outside space all at once. I'm really blown away by these paintings and these drawings and these ideas of how we can see space in dynamic and also strange ways. Lastly, this sort of idea, although this is a very brief part of this history and a sort of specific one, but I appreciate learning how different cultures also take perspectives and ignore other perspectives. So in this picture, you can see on the left, the bridge is lifted up and towards us in a way that sort of defies gravity. I'm seeing something in the center at what feels like a linear perspective, and then I'm seeing a bridge and a floating world behind me, or behind the subjects in the center. So this sort of short and brief glimpse, or sort of blip in art history, referred to as ukiyo-e, is an interesting aspect in terms of space. All of this is to say is that this is all dealing with space in a really interesting way. I think I'm probably going way over time, so I'm going to maybe speed up a tiny bit. In 2019, I start to realize I want to change in the studio, and I begin to paint and draw animals. I begin to realize I want a living form in the work, and I take a trip to France in 2019 with my husband, or fiance at the time, and I'm sort of blown away by these cave paintings that show an amazing sense of line, of atmosphere, of signifiers, and of space, but with the most simplest means, a line or sort of a hollowed out stick to create what we refer to as sort of atmosphere, or like sfumato is sort of a technical word, but something about this idea of softness in this experience to me was really exciting. So in these ancient caves, in this experience in 2019, I started to realize that the work needed to change drastically. And in doing so, I come back to Brooklyn and I start to change my work. When we were in Paris and the south of France, we went to museums. I noticed I paid more attention to the animals than I did anything else in all of the pictures. And I start to feel more confident and more excited about animals as a subject or a departure point in the work. So I begin to think, how can I find them? How can I pay attention to them? And I do. I collect images and screenshots, and I source compositional possibilities from the internet, from digital drawing, from collage, from simple generic things like Instagram or photo apps, and I sort of propose different ideas in which paintings can live. You know, it doesn't ever act as a one-to-one relationship. It's all sort of data and training. And at the time, I'm dealing with the idea of animals and structures and play and thinking, how can I get these animals in a painting? And it never really feels logical, but it never really feels like it should anyway. And so this sort of commitment to line here you can see is a definitive decision. I then start to realize I should echo and challenge ideas of a softness. One thing the cave paintings made me think of was that there's two specific elements of these cave paintings. They have a clear line and they have atmosphere. They have a softness. So I go back to my studio and think, I'm using an airbrush gun, but it's not because it's cool and fancy and easy. It's not easy. It's because it acts like a giant colored pencil for myself. And since I feel more like a drawer, it feels more natural for me to address painting this way if I deal with pigment on a surface. I'm collecting tons of photos of stray cats. This is during the pandemic, and I'm starting to feel like I have to start caring about the things around me, but what is it that I care about? I'm going to continue to pay attention to these subjects, but I'm going to think about their fur in a sort of abstract way. I'm going to start to think about their patterns in a way that feels like it can take up space in the background. At the time, I'm thinking about ideas of personifying animals or wondering if they worry or if they wonder about their own patterns. I know that they probably don't, but it was a way for me to play with pictures and a way for me to play with form in a way that provided a sense of joy and color and you know, a way to not overthink what I was worrying about. So the sort of relationship to painting changes every time I begin a painting, in that I'm always affected by, you know, actual events in the world. So at the time, early 2020, everything feels like it's literally on fire. It was. I mean, the unfortunate fires in Australia and of course continued all throughout the world, effects of global warming, you name it. I started to think about like how I could possibly paint about or even think about this idea of this level of seriousness in work that felt really playful at the time. So the work sort of traverses this idea of understanding space, understanding a sense of play, but also trying to always absorb events that are happening to me at the time. I'm just going a little bit faster, only because I know I'm going to be way over time if I don't, or I probably already am. In the build-up for a show I had, I began to make work that was more specific. Sometimes when you have a show or a project, it actually helps you really hone in on things that you otherwise might not. And so for a long time before I had shows or any opportunities to show, I would pretend I had shows. And this really helped me solidify work in a way that felt more exact and make stronger decisions. So I began to layer more in the work and sort of push recognizable outlines away and deal with softness and space. So I'm using oil stick here, and I'm using airbrush, and this painting had like 15 lives, maybe 20 lives before. But I start to eliminate the figure of the animal, and I start to think about like the echo of an animal, or the footprints, or what animals leave behind, the sort of ghost of an animal. So here you can see hooves or letters or sort of imprints. Again, there's no physical space you can understand. It's sort of an ethereal space, an atmospheric space. And the paintings, I'm using drawing materials, I'm using airbrush guns, I'm using anything I want at the time to make the textures and the fur and the patterns I was paying attention to. So these are two paintings from the show last year I had in New York. Dealing with this idea of footprints, of color, of systems. The title show was called An Echo's Glyph, which is a nod to the history of a glyph. I talked about ledger drawings a little bit before, but this sort of nod to an identity marker or a glyph that hovers above protagonists in ledger drawings is a direct nod to the research and the beauty I think that work shows. And so An Echo's Glyph, this show, was dealing with this idea of how to generate form through process, how not to plan, but how to experience the work with the work. Here I'm using airbrush and oil stick. Sometimes images are really clear and sometimes they diffuse. There's sort of a stacked environment in a lot of these paintings. There is no depth in the picture plane. It's frontal. It's dark. Ideas of how to form letters and language begin to evolve. And on the right, a painting that looks like a spear began as a T or an ear or a pattern on a certain animal. And so there's these departure points in the paintings that allow for a sense of openness. Sure, an animal might be the departure point, but after that, I start to fade out and I wonder what else I can do. This is just an install shot. So pattern is something that reoccurs in the work and uses a sort of sense of atmosphere to sort of diffuse any sort of logical space that the animals might live. Again, it's not about where they live, of course. It's about this sort of idea about language, about what painting can do. So this idea of generating new forms through work and through layers is about learning and sort of reflects an interest I have in a collaboration with oneself, but also a collaboration with future possibilities. I'm going to slide through, I think, pretty quickly now. So I'm digital drawing. I draw analog. I consider drawing an important departure point, but also really the work itself. There's many stages of drawing, some which is highly representational, some which is gestural. And this sort of amounts to an amount of information I have at my fingertips. In athletics, they refer to it as muscle memory. And in drawing, of course, maybe they don't use that term so much, but that's what it is. It's just muscle memory. So the more I can understand a form and its details, the more I can understand how to do it fast. And when I'm not looking at the object, and when I've got an airbrush mask on, and when I'm tired, it's about the containment of the hand, not the first learning of the form. Egyptian art, I mean, it doesn't get better. I think about stacked space, hieratic scale. I think about this idea of how I can make these new paintings I'm making after this show honor and echo this idea of a physical stacked space, the sort of information that starts at the bottom as a vague glyph but transcends upwards towards the top to a more specific bird. This is after the show. This is really new work. This is work in the last 6 months, and I'm trying to think about ways I can use one animal, a bird specifically, or a bird/glyph letter to paint and to evolve new form within this process. These are two paintings that are really similar, but a different color key. They're airbrush on canvas. I think this image is a little blown out, but that's okay. So this idea of the glyph continues in the work, and this idea too of always being really aware of what I'm not doing right can mess with me. But I thought, you have done stacked forms quite a bit. What about a singular form? So I'm always trying to figure out how to give myself obstructions. I'm very aware of my habits. And so these are two works I just recently finished, which are on view at a show in LA. I'm dealing with a singular form with a sort of collapsed bird. I'm thinking about gravity right now. What happens when we fall? What happens when we fly? What happens when we fail? These are very literal things, but they're sort of eternally relevant. Again, you can see language in the paintings. You can see form underneath. You can see layers. I don't make paintings in a way that I could ever ask anyone to make them for me. I can never make a painting again. The only thing I can do is give it another life in a different form. I work in a really irreversible order to like an infuriating rate, which I wish I maybe didn't sometimes. Anyway, these are some of the last paintings I'll show, and then I'm going to close up a little faster than normal. This is a digital drawing. The newest thing that I think I haven't figured out yet, but maybe I did on the airplane yesterday, was this inclusion of sneakers in the work, wanting to get back to a reference to a human form and not just an animal form. So here you can see a painting on the left. I'm starting to deal with this idea of an outline of a shoe. I'm positive it will change 1,000 times. But I'm thinking about athletics again, or the sort of sense of identity at a very different time in my life when I'm really not nearly as athletic as I used to be. And thinking about that vulnerability and how I can make it make sense, or how I can not make it make sense. So these are the last two paintings. They're very small. A shoe is a subject in an abstract, gestural way on the left, and a shoe is a subject on the right in a little bit of more of a solid way, but obscured way. Again, still dealing with birds and with flight and the sort of sense of pattern. Again, electricity comes in and out of the work in a way as a purely joy of color. I'm going to close up here, and I'm going to talk about just briefly the idea of success. I think it's a really complicated topic. I think for me, success is endurance. I think success is this idea of community, of commitment, and of continued engagement. I don't think winning is possible in art. I think it's really dangerous to think about it like that. I think you should surround yourself with people that are really good, likely better than you, if you want to be better. And I think this idea of athletics for me is sort of a constant in my life, but the relationship to winning has really, really changed. Proximity really matters. Being in the middle pack really is important. It's just this idea that you're not thinking that it has to be solved tomorrow. You don't have to have a show tomorrow. You don't have to sell anything tomorrow. You have to just continue and build a way that you can make art no matter what the circumstance is. The last thing I'll talk about very briefly, because I know I'm over time, is a project I've been working on for 5 years with my friend Hillary Doyle. It's the New York City Crit Club. Hillary's over here on the left with me. She's a great painter, and we've been friends for years, and we met at a party in 2017, and she asked me to co-teach a class with her, and I said, sure. And I said, what's it about? And she says, well, it's sort of an adult critique class. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she's like, well, it's a class I kind of made. It's kind of called the New York City Crit Club, but it really hadn't become a real big thing yet. And so we really began that project together that year. And we had one class of 18 people at the Abrams Art Center in New York City, all people my age or older than me, all people post-grad school or maybe right before, people 70 years old, 50, 40, everything. And I thought it was really beautiful. So we decided to continue the project. And in 5 years, of course, a lot has happened and it's been a lot of work. And it is truly a labor of love, I will be honest about that, but it's also something I believe in so passionately. We have now created programs that essentially allow people of all ages and of all, I don't want to even use the term levels, but varying degrees of art practicing to be engaged in a sort of serious environment that I consider like a post-school. This idea of post-school is important because when you finish grad school or any other program, you then have to figure out what to do with it. And sure, silence and quiet is very important, and you'll find your own networks however you want, but it's really helpful to have some teamwork and to have some collaborators and community. So we've created virtual programs. We are running 23 or 22 classes this semester, some virtual and some at our Brooklyn space, which we just launched this summer. We have an ethos that is about inclusion, so if someone can't afford a really, really discounted class, there is so many things set in place for people to be a part of it. We have BIPOC scholarships, we have work study rates, which is just to say discounted rates so that people can help us with Instagram, help us with hanging up art, be a part of the community and get a discount. And if you can't afford it, then we can obviously also take care of it. So no one's excluded, no matter what. And you still get to work with the best critics, I think, around. This community and this engagement is important because it introduces you to new people. Everyone finds this at their own rate, and I think there are so many other cool projects doing similar things. But this is an example of what we do. We take artists to galleries, and we have crit nights, and we have professional practices, we have art history, we have research, we have material and technique classes. All of these are online and in person. The idea that you stop learning after graduate school is sort of obviously not a thing, and this idea of continual connection is also really important. So many of these artists have gone on to have major solo shows and finishing grad school and way past grad school and just reinvigorated their practice. And so I'm really proud of the connection it affords people at a really, really inclusive rate, and also that we have faculty that we pay higher than the measly adjunct wage, but at least it's better. And it's an environment in which teachers can teach the way they want to teach. There's no grading. Everyone wants to be there. It's like the best teaching experience, I think, because of that exact reason. So I'm really proud of this project, and we are very busy, and we're very excited about it, and we are excited to go back to field trips, taking people to studios that otherwise might not have the access to. This was a visit to Kathy Bradford in 2018. And the project itself is, in closing, something I care a lot about. We launched a residency program, and we have almost 19 faculty members, so many of which are incredible. They're all really excited to be a part of it in a different way, as it acts as an opportunity to sort of add to the academic experience, but not in an institutional setting. I should also say, too, I'm really pro-MFA. I think it's great, especially if you don't have to pay for it. We're not a replacement. We can't be. We don't want to be. I just want to address the issue of time and labor after college and after grad school. And I want to also address the issue of ageism as well, and employment. This idea that like maybe you're 50, 60, 70, 80, and like you didn't go to a fancy BFA or MFA, and maybe you just need to meet a new round of people, and your life takes off after that. And in grad school, I noticed a little sense of ageism with people that were older in the program, and the young sort of art stars saying like, oh, well, what's going to happen with them? And I remember hating that and thinking that's so silly that you can't learn from them. So the program is really inclusive, and I think that's the most important thing. And so I could talk about it forever, but I will not. So I'm going to end with this great drawing by a student who made a drawing of cars. And thank you so much for your time. I know I went way over time.